what makes GSP so good at takedowns? I've gotten a chance to even recently watch him do takedowns.
Mm.
Is it within this framework that you're teaching? What stands out to you about him that you draw lessons from?
Yeah, that's another example of someone who's performing takedowns in a rule set radically different from wrestling. Um, just as the ADCC rule set is so different from conventional wrestling rule sets, that the whole manner in which you approach takedowns and even your understanding of takedowns has to be quite strongly modified. So to an MMA, it's even more extreme. People always think, oh, this guy's a good wrestler. He should be able to get takedowns in MMA easily. What you find is that the wrestling skills in MMA enable you to finish takedowns. If you get in on your opponent and get to the legs or the waist or what have you, your wrestling skill will enable you to finish the takedown. But getting to the takedown is massively different in the context of MMA than it is in wrestling. The entire stance is different. The entire set of distancing is different. There's the idea of positioning within a cage, like how close you are to the perimeter of the cage changes radically how you approach the takedown. The setups are literally night and day different. The setups are almost entirely composed of striking setups rather than grappling setups. And so the act of getting to the takedown is like a completely different sport. Now, George studied wrestling and used to go to wrestling practice twice a week. In Canada, they do freestyle wrestling. They don't use the American college style of wrestling. Now, George's main emphasis in wrestling training was takedowns. Obviously, the whole ground element of freestyle wrestling was of no interest to him, like learning how to put people's back on the ground and turn them with leg laces and gut wrenches was of no value in MMA. So he devoted almost all of his study to just the act of taking someone down. So as in pure wrestling, George is not bad. I think he would be a very competitive match, even for a highly ranked American freestyle wrestler. Obviously, he would lose easily on the ground because he's not used to the parterre. He'd probably be leg laced or gut wrenched quite easily by a skilled opponent. But in just a pure takedown battle, he'd be a competitive training partner for even a good wrestler. But in actual MMA competition, he could take down even the most highly credentialed wrestlers, and in some cases make it look almost effortless. And that came from his unification of striking skill with wrestling. So he used wrestling skills to finish the takedown, and his karate and boxing, kickboxing pedigree to enter into the takedown. Now, when he initiated the study of this is at a time when MMA was pretty much in its infancy, and he was one of the most impressive people I've ever seen in this regard. He was a true innovator. He innovated this specialized area of striking to a takedown to a greater degree than anyone else I'm aware of.
Well, let me ask you about this innovation, because you're one of the most innovative people in martial arts. There's several major categories of innovation that you have led. Obviously, leg locks, body lock, now wrestling. What's your process of innovation? So seeing the problems in a particular system, the gaps, how do you identify them, and how do you figure out systems of how to fill those gaps?
First thing I look for is what are the current weaknesses in a given combat sport. So in the case of jiu-jitsu, it was very obvious that historically jiu-jitsu had always been weak in leg locking. Jiu-jitsu had always been weak in standing position overall, and these were things that needed to be sorted out immediately. In its infancy, mixed martial arts was divided between grapplers and strikers, and most of the emphasis in early mixed martial arts was on the idea of specialists in a given domain forcing the fight into their domain, and that my early work with George St. Pierre convinced me that the right approach wasn't increased specialization and learning to force your athlete into that area of specialization at the expense of the opponent, but rather the real battles of the future would be won and lost not with techniques per se, specialized techniques, but rather the integration of techniques and the overlap between the various grappling and striking skills, so that someone who was an inferior grappler would have just enough grappling skill to be able to hold a grappler off and then defeat them with striking. And a striker who was, if you went to fight someone who's superior to you in striking, you would have just enough striking skill to be able to hold them at bay and then enter into grappling. This went further and further until it got clear that there were whole areas of the sport that you needed to change your entire mindset about them. So that people went into early MMA thinking in terms of grappler and striker. What I started to think is in terms of, okay, there are 4 fundamental skill areas of mixed martial arts. There is shoot boxing, which is the integration of takedowns and striking. There is clinch boxing, which is the integration of upper body clinch skills combined with striking. There is fence boxing, which the 2 athletes are locked up with each other on the fence, and they have to integrate takedown defense and striking skills. And there is grapple boxing, which is the merging of ground grappling with striking. And when you broke MMA down into those 4 categories, you saw that each one of those 4 domains transcends the specialized martial arts that form their components. So, for example, in clinch boxing, you would incorporate things from judo, Greco-Roman, freestyle, jiu-jitsu submissions, Muay Thai clinching techniques. But even if you took all 5 of those, the rule set that you're operating in required such extensive modification that the final product of clinch boxing transcended all 5 of its component martial arts and became its own autonomous skill. It needed to be worked autonomously. And when we broke George's training down into those 4 areas, that's when real progress started to be made. That's when you started to see the integration of those 4 phases, and the striking and grappling within each of them was where victory was being won and lost.
So once you reframe how you see a particular combat sport, then you can start doing these detailed development of ideas that actually they fit.
There's a sense in which it had to start with a paradigm shift, and then a research program began after that. You don't start with research, you started with a paradigm shift and then went to research.